Diseases don't discriminate between the poor and the rich. In this video, we're going to cover some disgusting examples of disease and STDs royals throughout history have had. Archduke Otto of Austria. Austria around the turn of the 20th century is perhaps the most well known for Franz Ferdinand and the onset of World War I, but Archduke Otto should be more well known. Born in 1865 in Austria, Otto was the center of plenty of scandals and controversies. Around 1900, however, the royal caught syphilis. He would only live for 6 more years. During the time, Otto lived in agonizing pain. He spent his last few years being tended to by his mistresses before ultimately passing in 1906. King Henry VIII. Henry VIII is known for a lot of things, namely his countless marriages and dead wives. However, another thing the crazy Brit is known for is his ulcer. After falling off of his horse during a joust, the king's health began to deteriorate. Odorous ulcers developed on his legs and his weight began to increase. Some people also theorized that the king actually had syphilis, like Archduke Otto. However, none of his children exhibited symptoms of syphilis, so it's impossible to conclusively say. Beyond ulcers and syphilis, Henry VIII was also thought to suffer from diabetes and problems with his circulatory system. Queen Victoria and the royal disease. Syphilis isn't the only disease that plagued British monarchs. Hemophilia, the inability for blood to clot into scabs, is sometimes called the royal disease because of just how badly it affected the European monarchies. Queen Victoria, the English queen between 1837 and 1901, is thought to have inherited the disease after a genetic mutation. From her, several of her children would inherit the disease. The hemophilia wasn't specific to the English, however. As English royalty married into other royal families like the Russian Tsardom, the disease began popping up in other royals. STDs and other diseases don't discriminate between peasants and royalty. We've covered some disgusting examples of infected royalty, ranging from the infamous Henry VIII's leg ulcers to Queen Victoria's royal disease. We're far from finished though. Stick around to learn about even more monarchs who've dealt with illness. Royal Crohn's disease. Times have changed a lot from the 1800s, especially our knowledge of disease and bacteria. It wasn't until 1857 that microbiology was actually recognized as a field of science. Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, is one sad example of this ignorance. Albert suffered from Crohn's disease, a condition that causes the bowels to be inflamed. After dying from the condition, Queen Victoria forbade anyone from examining the corpse. Until it was determined Crohn's was the cause of death, for a century and a half, typhoid was blamed. King George III's madness. This next example isn't as disgusting as it is just sad. King George III, the English monarch during the late 1700s and American Revolution, suffered from a disease called porphyria, caused by the body overproducing proteins in the blood. Symptoms range from things like insanity to basic bodily pains. In George's case, sadly, insanity was his main symptom. His subjects would tie the king to a chair for hours during outbursts. His porphyria came in waves, with him being sane for years before the disease struck again. Near the end of his life, the king was basically imprisoned in his castle while his son ruled, until his death in 1819. Ivan's terrible disease. Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia, definitely lives up to his name, but not for the reasons you think. In 16th century Russia, terrible was used to describe someone who was imposing, strong, and dominant. Ivan met all of these qualifications for one reason. The first Tsar actually suffered from syphilis. When his remains were examined in the 1960s, they were found to be covered with mercury. During Ivan's time, mercury was used to treat syphilis. Both syphilis and mercury poisoning can cause bursts of violence, leading to Ivan doing things like massacring his own cities, torturing people at parties, and being one of the most promiscuous monarchs in history.